Pat Whidden from the East Hants Historical Society sent me a newspaper article that was written, I would say, in the 1980s, roughly. And that piece was about the military base and its existence and how there was still some remnants of that base around, mostly ordnance that had been discovered and things that had been discovered that had been dropped into the Cobequid Bay. At the very end, as sort of like a last line, made reference in that article to the fact that even though the base was located by the Cobequid Bay in Selmah, it was named the New Minas Experimental Base. Just that one little line, I thought, okay, well, there's the name. So I looked up New Minas Experimental Base, and all of a sudden, I had a few hits. And one of those hits is with the U.S. Navy Naval History and Heritage Command. They talked about having a file in their archive that was specifically named the New Minas Experimental Base. So I reached out and asked to see that file, and inside were approximately 12 documents, all related to the New Minas Experimental Base, all phases from the beginning right to the end in 1945. So all the backup that speaks to the existence of that base exists in that file. It outlines in great detail exactly what they're testing in New Minas, and they're testing mines. 1942 is a very interesting year in terms of military history. You have the Americans entering the war on December 7th, 1941, when they're attacked at Pearl Harbor. America's giant machine starts to get to work in 1942. So there's a lot of things going on. That industry starts overnight. Having to start producing all the guns, all of the trucks and jeeps and tanks and planes and equipment that go into warfare, and mobilizing all those people, changing industry from producing one type of product to an entirely new type of product, it is just an amazing transition when you think about it. You know, you see that play out in Selmah. You see the Americans searching for a site that they can build a base basically overnight and test a very important piece of technology that they want to immediately put into the battlefield. They knew they wanted a place to test these that was away from the Naval Ordnance Lab in Washington, somewhere where a separate group of scientists could test the work of the scientists at the Naval Ordnance Lab. They didn't want that direct connection between the technology that was being developed and the testing. They wanted that separation so that there was an honest opinion of the technology. Selmah isn't the very first spot they picked to do this. They had the water, they were able to drop them by parachute, but recovery of the experiment was not 100%. What they discovered was a location that's world-renowned for its tides. Twice a day, the New Minas Basin and Cobequid Bay empty out, leaving this very hard clay surface. So they can drop their experiments by plane, have the parachutes deploy, have it land in a natural way in the water. All of the water disappears, leaving that experiment high and dry on the bottom of the Cobequid Bay. You can drive out using heavy equipment, winch that experiment onto the back of one of those Jeeps, haul it immediately back to an experimental lab to take it apart and see the results of your work. Robert H. Park's letter refers to a number of different marks or models of mines that were tested. Mark 13, the Mark 15, and the Mark 25. You have a group of scientists coming up with ideas and testing ideas of how can we detonate a mine acoustically, how can we detonate it with pressure, how can we detonate it with magnetics. They're just coming up with all kinds of very interesting forward-thinking ideas to try to move that technology forward. Like 1942, 1943, you start to see those Mark 13 and Mark 15 models being used in theater, mostly in the Pacific. And towards the end of the war, you start to see the Mark 25, and that shows up in Operation Starvation. It's one of the mines they predominantly used to surround Japan, and they ended up sinking 1 million or more tons of shipping in that period. Those are all tested at the base in Selmah.
When they opened up the Selmah airport, they got permission to use the runways. Brand new concrete. Now, mind you, it wasn't asphalt, concrete. Beautiful airport.
This is a very special aircraft and a very special pilot too, isn't it?
Yes. Lieutenant Green, Fred Green was his name, and he was about 40-year-old. He was a daredevil. He flew down with the plane from the United States. When he would arrive in the spring, he would have the bomb bay loaded with cigarettes and contraband of all kinds, liquor for the guys for the whole 8 months, all in the bomb bays. He was a great guy, but he was full of the devil.
What was he flying?
TBF Avenger. It was a torpedo bomber.
Yeah.
And the first heavy aircraft, single-engine aircraft to ever take off from the flat top with a bomb in it.
Right.
And he got commissioned. He'd just take him 5 minutes to come from Divert over to Selmah, land there, and the guys would be waiting there for him, and he'd just turn around and they'd shut the thing down and hook on, drag it up into the airplane, and close the doors.
Yeah.
And away you go.
Tell me about those experiences. You knew this plane was on the tarmac. You just happened to be there, didn't you?
Well, I happened to get on the truck and go up.
You had no idea what was going on. You just went for the ride, didn't you?
I didn't care what they were doing. I just loved to get in it, and I'd go up. And he was that type of a guy. He saw me coming. He knew what I was right there for. He said, "What do you want?" "Get the hell in here and shut up." And he'd help me climb up and get in the back. And I just sat there. No seats, just a rack where they put stuff. So I remember one time he took me up, and when we were coming in up here, and he did a loop, and I blacked out. I thought we went in a fog. And I said, "That's strange, I don't remember seeing any fog." And I didn't know I blacked out. And he grinned, he had a great big grin when he looked around like that, and I said, "You bugger." He tipped over and let me take a shot of the base, far off so you can't really tell what it is, but I know.
So tell me about these bombing runs, because they weren't all the same, were they? They were
different heights, different speeds, different wind conditions. They tried everything.
Yeah.
They were working toward an end that they wanted, so they had to erase all the variables.
Yeah.
And say, well, this is the one that works the best.
And that leads me to like Cobequid Bay and that great photo that has a great portion of the bay in it. And it has what looks like pyramids floating in the water. But what you've filled me in on later is that those are targets. And there's actually a great photo of you sitting on top of one of those as a young man.
They were made of pontoons, probably 6 of them. And it was a pyramid that floated in the water with a big cable and anchor. So they had one at low water tide, they had another one 3/4 of a mile up the shore, and one down, and they were in line, parallel with the beach, parallel with the shore. They lined up on those buoys. They had 3 stations, one on the end of the dock, one 1,000 feet down, 1,000 feet up, that did a triangulation on every bomb that dropped.
So when you say station...
A little hut.
Oh, a little hut. So this is along the side of the...
Right on the edge of the bank.
Okay.
So they just opened up the thing and they had visual of the whole bay.
Gotcha.
On days when the wind was blowing and the waves were rough, they couldn't remember where they dropped naturally. They were all over the place.
Yeah.
But they,
So there's like observers in
yeah,
those.
exactly. That's what they were. The
Yeah.
observers.
Yeah. So, you know, in this case, Lieutenant Green, these guys all just walked into your life and walked right back out again,
Yeah.
isn't it? What an interesting bunch of characters.
They were great guys. They just were good guys. They were all smart. If you weren't smart enough to stay there, you were gone. And that all happened under my nose, and in hindsight, I just wish I'd have paid so much more attention.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And even when Bob Campbell came back on the visit, it was so short that I regret not having somehow sat down for 2 or 3 hours and related back over the things that happened.
I think Robert Campbell's visit back to see the base is a sad footnote to his career. The fact that there was nothing there to remember that experimental base by. I'm pleased that this project puts to mind again people like Bob Campbell and the other specialists that worked at that experimental base, and reminds people that a lot of work went on, a lot of sacrifice was made. People left their homes, worked in foreign countries, all in the name of freedom.
He said, I gotta go. I gotta come down and see that place. I gotta see it one more time. And he was almost had tears in his eyes, nothing to see. He said, you mean there's nothing here? No, it's gone. He just stood there in amazement and looked, because he expected to see something.
You can get your bearings fairly quickly and start to picture and imagine in all the photos where you are. Being at that well house, which is the only piece that sort of remains on site, you can quickly get oriented as to where the Avenger would have flown over and where the residence and the mess area and and the experimental area, they all would have been. It's just, there's no base anymore. There's just basically trees and grass where that used to be.
Does any of this stuff fit with the base?
No.
No. It's all different.
This is all new when they put the park in. This is one of the remnants that they dropped out in the bay.
Yeah.
It was retrieved because they lost it. No one took it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you can see how high it is. I'm 5'8" or 5'7". Gives you an idea how high it is. And it's supposed to, when it's fully loaded with the instruments and the front was loaded with plaster, it's supposed to equal the exact weight of a bomb ready to be armed and set off.
This is hard to read, but it says experimental mine, memorial to the American military activities on this property during World War II. It just makes me wonder why it isn't a bigger thing around here. There's the interpretive board out there that tells us a story about it, but I've talked to a lot of the people in the community while I've been researching around here, and nobody really knows what it was for, what was actually done. That information doesn't exist around. So we're heading up to the only piece really that's remaining on the site that you can point to and say that was part of the base.
Yeah.
And that's the well.
We're coming to it, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was built in 42, I suppose. They took them all winter to drill it.
So all that red brick is original.
That's original brick, yeah.
Just looking at your photo here, I would say I'm just gonna walk, you tell me. I'm gonna walk, I'm thinking right about, it looked like it was a little bit inset. So I'm thinking like,
You're very, very close to it.
right about here.
Yeah.
That's the corner of the building where the back end is gonna head over that way. There'll be a door somewhere over there, and it stretches that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Goes directly toward the water.
Yeah, yeah. And then of course, over here, experimental shed, the workshop. And back here, what did you call that building, that third building?
The garage.
That's the garage.
repair garage.
Yeah, so when you look at that photo.
Those two were parallel. This
Right.
one was vertical.
Right.
To the road.
Yeah, you know, you can sort of see the base commander, Bob Campbell, looking at, some of his life's work, and really, that's it.
5 years of his life.
Yeah,
Completely out of context, it's just different.
Right here, what are the memories that come back for you, 1943 to 44?
Standing on the banks and watching the big aircraft come over and drop the bombs, you kept waiting, wondering when he was going to let the bomb go, and you could see it coming through the air. So when they landed in the water, from there, anywhere from there to there, terrific splash, and people would say, there's another one that blew up, there's another one that blew up. But since I worked there, I know that there was never any explosives in the bombs.
Right.
They were for test purposes other than blowing up.
So this is kind of the end of the road for us, because if we go any further, we're going to be in the Cobequid Bay here. But it was good to have this opportunity to walk this area with you and hear your recollections.
Oh, I was so excited and elated to just walk the walk and reflect back and think, I wish Bob Campbell was here. I just wish he were here. It didn't seem so important as it does now when I'm thinking back, and I said, what a change in life it made for me, because at 13, when I went to work there, probably just a young kid and getting in the way, but you aged rapidly. And in 4 years' time, I was probably 4 years ahead of my time. They had a very important duty to perform, and I'm sure each one did, unbeknownst to me. It was just a whirlwind of this and that, and guys coming and going, and faces if I just shut my eyes almost, I can see guys walking and faces.
I'm happy for you to learn some things, fill in some blanks. Think of Bob Campbell too, and he gave us service during, his formative years, right? And remembered it for his entire life.
Something struck him radically that he would come all the way back up.
To me, he sort of represents everybody that worked at that base. There is, not a whole lot there telling their story. So I'm glad we're able to do this.
It's a memory that stuck with me all my life. I felt that I was going to go to my grave and nobody would really know. A lot of people knew about it, but they didn't know anything about it. And that was the way they wanted it. So now it'll come to light.